The Driskill Hotel, where history, luxury, and death intersect. Imagine checking into a luxury hotel in the heart of Texas. The building is elegant, the lobby is grand, and the walls whisper stories from over a century ago. But as night falls, something feels wrong. Guests before you have reported unexplained sounds, sudden cold air, and most disturbingly, multiple deaths connected to the same room. This is not fiction. This is the story of the Driskill Hotel in Austin, Texas. Built in 1886 by cattle baron Colonel Jesse Driskill, the Driskill Hotel was designed to be the most luxurious hotel in the southern United States. At the time, it symbolized wealth, ambition, and the unstoppable expansion of Texas. What no one expected was that it would also become one of the most infamous hotels in America for repeated deaths and paranormal reports, particularly linked to Room 525. The Driskill Hotel has never been marketed as a haunted house. It is a fully functioning, high-end hotel used by politicians, celebrities, and tourists. Yet for decades, guests, staff, historians, and paranormal investigators have independently documented the same chilling accounts: deaths, suicides, and tragic accidents occurring in or around the same room. Let's begin with the first confirmed death connected to Room 525. In the early 1900s, a Texas state senator, historically identified as Colonel Jesse Driskill's associate, was staying in Room 525. Facing severe financial trouble and political scandal, the man reportedly took his own life inside the room by gunshot. At the time, suicides in hotels were quietly covered up to protect reputation. However, internal hotel records and historical accounts confirmed that a death did occur. This incident alone might have faded into history, but it didn't end there. Years later, a young girl, believed to be the daughter of a family staying at the hotel, fell to her death after chasing a ball near the stairwell close to Room 525. Multiple witnesses reported seeing the child moments before the fall. Her death deeply shocked the hotel staff and guests. Even more unsettling, guests later began reporting the sound of a child laughing and a ball bouncing late at night, especially near the 5th floor. Then came the third tragedy. In the 1930s, a newlywed bride, reportedly staying in or near Room 525, ended her life shortly after her wedding. Historical records suggest emotional distress and personal conflict, but what alarmed investigators was the pattern: another death, same location, same floor. 3 deaths, 1 room, over several decades. At this point, rumors spread across Austin. Locals whispered that Room 525 was cursed. Hotel management never officially confirmed paranormal claims, but they quietly stopped assigning the room as frequently. Some staff members even requested not to work that floor during night shifts. Fast forward to modern times. Despite renovations and modern security systems, guests continue to report disturbing experiences. Some claim their televisions turn on by themselves. Others report hearing footsteps, knocking, or whispers when no one is present. Several guests have stated that they felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, anxiety, or panic after spending time in Room 525, strong enough that they checked out early. One guest reported waking up at 3 a.m., unable to breathe, feeling as though someone was sitting on their chest. Another claimed to see a shadow figure near the foot of the bed. These accounts were made independently, years apart, by people who had no knowledge of the room's history before staying there. Skeptics argue that these experiences can be explained psychologically. Old buildings make noise, stress causes fear, history influences perception, and yet the pattern continues. What makes this case especially unsettling is that the Driskill Hotel is not abandoned. It's active, inspected, and regulated. There is no financial incentive for staff to promote fear. In fact, acknowledging such stories could harm business. Still, reports persist.
Historians have verified the deaths. Paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations on the fifth floor. Staff testimonies, some anonymous, describe elevators stopping on the fifth floor without being called and lights flickering specifically near room 525. For Americans, this story strikes a nerve because it sits at the crossroads of history, mental health, tragedy, and belief. These were real people, real deaths, real suffering. Whether or not one believes in ghosts, the emotional weight of repeated deaths in the same space cannot be denied.
Housekeeping employees, especially those assigned night shifts, have been among the most vocal, though often anonymously. Multiple former staff members have stated that room 525 was avoided whenever possible. Some claimed keys would stop working only for that room. Others said the door would be found unlocked after being secured. One longtime staff member described pushing a housekeeping cart past room 525 when she heard a child laughing behind her. Thinking it was a guest's child, she turned around, only to find the hallway completely empty. She later learned about the child who fell to her death decades earlier. Elevator behavior has also been frequently reported. Staff members describe elevators stopping at the fifth floor without being selected. Maintenance logs confirm that no mechanical errors were found during inspections following these incidents. Importantly, these accounts span different decades, different employees, and different management teams. This continuity raises questions that are difficult to ignore. Then there are the investigators. Several reputable paranormal investigation groups, some affiliated with universities and historical societies, have conducted controlled overnight investigations. While these groups vary in belief systems, many recorded electromagnetic field spikes, unexplained temperature drops, and audio anomalies captured on recording devices near room 525. One investigation documented a clear, childlike voice captured on audio equipment responding to a question despite no children being present in the building overnight. Skeptics argue these findings could be environmental interference, and that argument is valid. But again, the consistency remains. Now let's revisit the deaths. As covered in part, at least 3 documented deaths are associated with the fifth floor and room 525. However, historians believe the actual number may be higher. Early 20th century hotel deaths were often recorded vaguely or disguised as illness or accidents to protect reputation. What matters is not just the number, but the pattern. Each death involved emotional distress, sudden, unexpected tragedy, occurrence in or near the same room. Psychologists studying environmental trauma suggest that locations tied to repeated emotional suffering can influence human perception and emotional response. In other words, even without paranormal explanations, spaces remember trauma through stories, memory, and atmosphere. For American audiences, this part is especially unsettling because hotels represent safety, rest, and temporary escape. The idea that a luxury hotel room could become a silent witness to repeated deaths challenges our sense of control. It's also important to clarify what this story is not. This is not a case of murder sprees. This is not a crime scene covered up by authorities. This is not a horror movie plot. These were isolated tragedies spread across decades, connected by location rather than cause. And that makes the story more disturbing, not less. Hotel management has consistently stated that guest safety is their top priority. No official claims of hauntings are promoted. Room 525 has been renovated multiple times, furniture replaced, walls repainted, layout adjusted. Yet guests still report the same feelings. One modern guest wrote in a travel forum that they checked out early because they couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened there. Only later did they learn about the room's history. That reaction, before knowing the story, is what fuels the mystery. In American culture, where skepticism and belief often collide, stories like this occupy a unique space. They sit between documented history and unexplained experience, between fact and feeling. For an American audience, one that values evidence, psychology, and science, this part is crucial. Let's begin with the psychological explanation. Psychologists use a concept known as place-based trauma. It suggests that when a location becomes associated with repeated emotional pain, tragedy, or death, it can influence how people feel, even if they are unaware of the history. Older buildings, especially 19th century hotels like the Driskill, were constructed differently. Thick walls, high ceilings, long hallways, and limited natural light can create a sense of isolation. At night, these factors are amplified. The human brain, especially when tired, fills in gaps, sometimes with fear. However, this explanation does not fully account for identical experiences reported by strangers decades apart. Next, let's discuss infrasound. Infrasound refers to low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing. Scientific studies have shown that infrasound can cause anxiety, feelings of dread, pressure in the chest, the sensation of being watched. Old buildings often produce infrasound through HVAC systems, elevators, and structural vibrations. Some researchers believe infrasound may explain why people feel sudden fear in certain locations without understanding why. Yet again, there's a problem. In multiple inspections and investigations at the Driskill Hotel, no consistent infrasound source was found that would only affect one room or one floor. Mechanical systems impact entire sections of a building, not a single location repeatedly tied to emotional reactions. Then there's suggestion and expectation. Skeptics argue that once a place gains a reputation, people subconsciously create experiences. But here's the key point. Many guests reported fear before knowing the room's history. Only later did they research where they had stayed. That detail matters. Now let's look at environmental memory, a controversial but growing field of study. Some scientists and philosophers propose that intense emotional events may leave residual imprints, not in a supernatural sense, but through human behavior, storytelling, and subtle environmental changes. When tragedies occur repeatedly in one place, those stories are quietly passed down by staff, locals, and even architecture itself. In American culture, we often underestimate the power of shared memory. Even without words, places carry reputations. They influence how people behave, how long they stay, and how safe they feel. But again, the pattern of repeated deaths brings us back to the same question. Statistically, hotels experience deaths. That's a reality. People travel while sick, elderly guests pass away, accidents happen. But the concentration of emotionally charged deaths in or near the same room over decades is statistically unusual. This doesn't mean there is a supernatural cause. It means the situation deserves attention rather than dismissal. Another important factor is privacy and silence. Hotels historically served as discreet locations for people experiencing personal crises. In the early 20th century, hotels were often chosen for suicides because they provided anonymity. This explains why tragic events happened in hotels, but not why the same room becomes the setting multiple times. Renovations were intended to reset the space. Room 525 has been remodeled multiple times, walls repainted, layout adjusted. Yet people still report sudden emotional heaviness, unexplained fear, sleep paralysis-like experiences, the urge to leave. Sleep paralysis deserves special mention.
Every death associated with the fifth floor was a real human life. These were not characters in a story. They were people with families, ambitions, and struggles. In early 20th century America, mental health was rarely discussed openly. Emotional distress was hidden. Seeking help was often considered weakness. Hotels, especially luxury hotels, became places of privacy, sometimes refuge, sometimes final escape. From an ethical standpoint, this context matters. When modern audiences discuss Room 525, the danger is reducing complex human suffering to entertainment. American culture has increasingly blurred the line between education and consumption. True crime podcasts, documentaries, and viral videos walk a fine line between awareness and exploitation. So where does this story fall? The difference lies in intent. Responsible storytelling focuses on facts, avoids exaggeration, and acknowledges uncertainty. It does not invent crimes, it does not mock belief, and it does not treat death as spectacle. This is why historians emphasize verified events over rumors. It's why serious investigators avoid dramatic conclusions, and it's why ethical discussions matter. Now consider the hotel's staff. Employees did not choose this history, but they live with it. Housekeepers, front desk clerks, security personnel, and maintenance workers are often the first to experience unusual situations, yet they are bound by professionalism. Former staff members have spoken about emotional fatigue. Some reported requesting reassignment from the 5th floor. Others described internal conflict, balancing personal discomfort with job responsibility. In the United States, workplace mental health has only recently become a serious topic. Stories like this reveal how environments can affect workers long-term, especially when silence is expected. Then there's the question of guest disclosure. Should hotels inform guests about past deaths? Legally, in most U.S. states, businesses are not required to disclose non-criminal deaths that occurred decades earlier. Ethically, opinions differ. Some argue that guests have a right to know. Others argue that disclosing such information would unfairly stigmatize spaces and reopen wounds. At the Driskill, management has chosen neutrality. They neither confirm nor deny paranormal claims. They do not assign meaning. They focus on hospitality. This approach reflects a broader American principle: allow individuals to decide what they believe. Another ethical layer involves preservation. Historic buildings are protected not just for beauty, but for memory. When tragedy becomes part of that memory, preservation becomes complicated. Should a room be repurposed, closed, memorialized? There is no national standard. Some argue that repeated tragedies deserve recognition, a plaque, a quiet acknowledgement. Others fear that formal recognition would invite sensationalism. In this case, subtlety has prevailed, and perhaps that's why the story remains powerful. Now let's address the audience directly. As Americans, we often ask, would I stay there? Some say yes, out of curiosity. Others say no, out of respect or fear. Neither choice is wrong. What matters is awareness. Choosing to stay in a place tied to tragedy is not inherently disrespectful. Ignoring the human cost behind the story is. Ethics also extend to belief. Skeptics deserve respect. Believers deserve respect. The story does not demand a conclusion. It demands consideration. Repeated deaths in one location raise questions about mental health support, historical silence, and how society responds to emotional crisis. Those questions are more important than whether the room is haunted. In many ways, Room 525 functions as a mirror. It reflects how Americans deal with discomfort. Do we investigate? Do we avoid? Do we sensationalize? Or do we quietly remember? The most ethical approach lies in balance. Tell the truth. Acknowledge uncertainty. Respect the dead. Avoid exaggeration. That balance is what separates meaningful storytelling from exploitation. As we reach the final chapter of this story, we return to the question that has quietly followed us from the beginning. Why does a single hotel room, decades later, still hold such power over people? This is not simply a story about death,
And it is not simply a story about a hotel. It is a story about memory. In the United States, we often believe that time erases everything, that renovations fix the past, that progress replaces pain. But history shows us something different. Time does not erase, it layers, and some layers are heavier than others. Room 525 exists today as a modern, functional hotel space. Clean sheets, updated fixtures, fresh paint. To the eye, it is unremarkable, but meaning is not carried by appearance alone. Meaning is carried by what happened when no one was watching. The deaths associated with this room were not dramatic headlines. They were quiet, personal, private. And that quietness is exactly what makes them linger. In American culture, we struggle with silence around emotional suffering. For much of the 20th century, mental health was hidden behind closed doors. Depression was weakness, despair was shame. Seeking help was rare. Hotels became temporary sanctuaries for people in crisis, anonymous spaces, places where someone could disappear, even briefly, from the expectations of life. That reality contextualizes why tragedy found its way into hotel rooms across the country. But again, the same room becomes the question. Throughout this series, we examined facts, verified historical deaths, consistent eyewitness reports, psychological and environmental explanations, media influence, and ethical responsibility. None of these alone solve the mystery. Together, they form something more honest, an incomplete picture. And incompleteness is uncomfortable, especially for American audiences who value resolution. But unresolved stories matter. They remind us that not everything fits into data or belief. Some truths live in patterns, some truths live in repetition, and some truths live in the emotional reactions of people who have nothing to gain by sharing their experience. The guests who checked out early did not seek attention. The employees who avoided the fifth floor did not seek fame. The historians who verified deaths did not seek spectacle. They all arrived at the same conclusion independently. Something about this place feels different. Whether that difference is psychological, environmental, cultural, or something we don't yet understand is secondary to the impact that it has. Because impact is measurable. Guests lose sleep. Employees feel stress. Visitors feel compelled to research, reflect, and question. That response alone makes this story relevant today. There is also a broader lesson here for the United States as a society. Places hold stories, even when we don't acknowledge them. We build over them, we repaint them, we rename them, but they remain. In hospitals, in schools, in hotels, in homes. Tragedy does not announce itself loudly. It settles quietly. And when it repeats, it demands attention. Room 525 does not ask us to believe in ghosts. It asks us to pay attention, to patterns, to silence, to how environments affect human emotion, to how society handles despair when no one wants to see it. That is why this story continues to be told, not as horror, but as caution. For some listeners, the conclusion will be skepticism. For others, belief. For most, uncertainty. And uncertainty is honest. The most respectful ending is not a declaration, but a reminder. Behind every mystery are real people. Behind every location are layered histories. And behind every repeated tragedy is a question society once chose not to answer. So the next time you check into a hotel room anywhere in America, remember this. You are not just entering a space. You are entering a timeline. And sometimes the walls remember more than we do.